introduce my lab. So this is the Laboratory for Conservation of Endangered Species, and it was jointly funded by DBT, DST, Central Zoo Authority, and Government of Andhra Pradesh, along with CSIR. Our parent institute is CCMB, Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. And here in this laboratory, we are seven, eight scientists who work on conservation of wild animals. So today I'll be talking about how we use DNA analysis in wildlife forensics. And I can hear some background voices. So is it a problem?
No issue.
Hello?
Madam, it is
Okay.
not, madam. You can proceed, madam.
Okay, fine. So, yeah. So, in addition, I mean, I started work on population genetics of tiger and other species. And the offshoot of that, I mean, as we develop databases in population genetics of a particular species, our knowledge could then be used for investigating forensic cases. Otherwise, I mean, without this background information, it becomes very difficult to investigate any case. So because we had this experience, more than 10 years of experience in DNA analysis of various species, we developed protocols and we put in place certain systems, certain analysis which could be used for forensics. So why do? Because there are various factors which are causing wild species to disappear. There are various factors which cause endangerment of species. To various other problems. And the third biggest problem which we are facing in India is poaching. So even if we do a lot of effort to conserve species or protect habitats, unless we tackle this problem of poaching or hunting of wildlife and trade of their parts, both within the country and outside the country, it's going to be very difficult to protect or conserve any wildlife. So this is a very big problem, and it has planned organized crime against wildlife. It damages our ecosystem. It affects the livelihood of people living around these forests. And it also leads to problems like disease communication because of smuggling of animals across borders. So what is this branch of wildlife forensics and what exactly do we want to do? So there's a lot of research which goes into application of whatever techniques are known in other aspects of science or biology. It is basically application of these techniques for detection of crime, and these techniques or analysis should be accepted in court. Okay, so wildlife forensics is a new field, and it basically works on the same principles as human forensics. Our goal is to examine, identify, and compare evidence from wildlife crime cases and link this evidence with a suspect or a victim. So biological material, as you all have been listening to several talks over the last, I mean, since yesterday. So there are various ways in which death can be investigated. There are several tests and several experts who are needed. So our role is in DNA analysis. We can do morphological identification and various other chemical tests also. But here at CCMB, we mainly focus on DNA analysis of whatever samples are sent to us. So what is DNA? I'm sure most of you all already know all this stuff. It's just a brush up with the basics. So this is a macromolecule which is present in the nucleus of every cell, and it is the genetic material which basically it's inherited by an individual from its biological parents, and it codes for several functions and proteins, etc. So there are variations between species, and these variations are coded by the DNA. But this DNA, I mean, these variations are very small. To a very large extent, we are similar. And also, a very small part of the DNA actually codes for proteins, and the function of that DNA is known. But a very large part of the DNA, that is almost 97, 98 part of 97 to 98% of the DNA, we do not understand its function. We are slowly now, there is research over the last 5 to 10 years, and we are trying to understand what is the function of this large amount of DNA. And that is, I mean, that was earlier called junk DNA, but now, of course, it is not junk. It is just that we do not understand its function properly. Now, this a part of the DNA which does not code for proteins shows individual variations, and that is used for identifying individuals within a given species. So in a mammal like human being, there are about 3 billion base pairs of DNA which is packed into the nucleus. And just a small part of that much DNA, just a small, I mean, few small fragments can be used for identifying individuals. Now, there are various applications of DNA typing. So there are also various questions which are asked, and accordingly, different parts of the DNA, I mean, different regions of the DNA are analyzed to address the different questions. So what is the use of DNA typing? So basically here I've used information from human forensics, that you can identify a mutilated body, you can establish paternity and maternity, you can identify criminals in various crime cases, it can be used for immigration purposes, etc. And it is also now widely used in conservation and in wildlife forensics. So depending on our question, there are various regions of the DNA which can be analyzed. Like for example, mitochondrial DNA can be analyzed to understand which species a particular sample comes from, what is the level of difference between different species, etc. What is the evolution of species within a particular family. All this can be understood by analyzing mitochondrial DNA. Microsatellite markers are part of that so-called junk DNA. Those are used for individual identification. Y chromosome markers can be analyzed to understand how male inheritance happens. And now with NGS, with a next generation sequencing and large scale sequence analysis, we can also look at this single nucleotide mutations, a single nucleotide mutation across the genome. There are several mutations between individuals, between species, and these mutations can be analyzed to answer various questions. So way back in 2000, when we started analyzing forensic cases, one of my colleagues, Dr. Sunil Verma, he developed a marker. It was a very simple and a very eloquent experiment which he did. He developed a pair of markers, PCR markers, or primers as we call them, which can identify almost all the mammalian species, bird species, and even fishes to a great extent. So using a single marker, we can identify which species that particular sample has come from. So this was a great achievement for CCMB. This is a very simple experiment. We just have to isolate DNA, run a PCR using this pair of markers, do sequence analysis, and look at the sequence and identify the species. And for this, Dr. Sunil Verma and Dr. Lalji Singh, they got several awards, and also these primers are patented. So I'll briefly run through the method. So any type of sample, be it tissue, be it feather, be it skin, hair, um, a bone, nails, claws, anything, any type of sample from which we can extract DNA. The limitation is that we should get DNA. If we get DNA, then from that sample, if we get DNA from that sample, we can run. This primer pair can be used to amplify a small fragment of the mitochondrial DNA that can be sequenced, and that sequence is then matched with a database which is available in the public domain in NCBI, and we can actually we can very confidently say that that particular sample is from a particular species. So we routinely do these tests, and now we have analyzed more than 3,000 cases so far, 3,000 forensic cases from across the country using this very simple protocol. These are the various type of samples which we get from different places. Our clients mainly are the forest department, police, customs, judiciary. Sometimes the magistrate directs that the case should go to CCMB, analyzed, and then they use the report for the verdict. So we get all type of samples, all shapes and sizes, and our only limitation, as I told earlier, is whether we can extract DNA or not. Over these years, Dr. Ajay Gaud, who's my colleague, and he basically deals with all such cases, and we have been very successful in developing protocols to extract DNA from almost every type of biological material. And we also get weapons and instruments which were used for handling the animal or for cutting, or then we get samples which are packed in various medium, um, samples which are cooked, which are preserved for a long period of time, nails, bones, antlers, everything. So we have a system in place now to extract DNA from all these sources. Our only problem is when samples are preserved in formalin. Formalin is a bad preservative and it damages the DNA. And even then, we can extract DNA to some extent from it gets damaged. So we get highly fragmented DNA when the sample is preserved in formalin. Other than that, we have been successful in extracting DNA from almost every other source. I'll just quickly run through some very interesting cases which we have dealt with so far. We get a lot of ivory consignments which are either seized by the forest department, police, or customs, and it becomes difficult. I mean, of course, there are experts who can morphologically identify such cases and identify which is a genuine ivory or when it is fake. So here, I mean, if it can be a quiz also for the participants, if people can identify which is real ivory and which is a fake ivory. I can come back to this maybe after I run through some of the slides. So if people are interested in answering, the participants, I request them that you can send in your answers, whether it's A, B, or C, which is real ivory. Then we get cases like this where the bullock cart or bullet or soil in which there are blood stains, and there's meat which is recovered from the accused, from the a person who is being caught. So from all these sources, we can extract DNA, and these are all very good sources of DNA, and we can identify. So as you see, if DNA was not available, if it was not possible um, to extract DNA or to analyze DNA and identify the species, it becomes extremely difficult to actually identify what was killed here. People can get away by saying that they have been handling some domestic animal, or it is goat, or I mean they can just say that, but whether it is deer, whether it's a protected species, all that is possible only when we do the DNA analysis. This was a this is again a very rare. I mean, now of course this is increasing in number. We get lyophilized venom, which has been extracted from snakes, and also venom in crystalline form. As you can see, the exhibit number, I think C. These are crystalline venom, which is packed in a jar. This is when venom is in powder form, and this is the liquid form of venom. So such things are also confiscated at the border when they are going out of India. And we have been asked to identify from which species, which snake species this particular venom has been extracted. This is very difficult because venom is a protein, it's a mixture of proteins, and it becomes difficult to identify which species unless we have the HPLC or GCMS profile of that particular venom. And if by chance, if the venom has not been processed to a great extent, and we are able to get some of the cells, epithelial cells of the snake when it was forced to eject the venom, if we are lucky to get that, uh, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Because I got some inquiry asking check your system. I didn't understand what that was.
No. That was for the participant, ma'am. Please.
Okay, okay, okay. So if we are lucky in such cases to get cells and extract DNA, then we can identify which species of snake has been used to extract this venom. And here you see this exhibit E. This was an interesting case where this bottle of wine was confiscated from a pub in Bangalore, and the snake was stuffed inside this bottle. So this again seems to be on the rise, where people mix venom with various drinks, and apparently it gives a stronger kick. So this is such cases have also started coming to us. Um, so we have, and this case came to us from Bangalore, and it was suspected to be the Indian king cobra or Indian cobra. And so it was booked. The case was booked under the Wildlife Protection Act of India. But when we did the analysis, it turned out to be the spitting cobra. Okay, am I not audible now?
Madam, you are audible, madam. You can proceed.
Yeah, you're audible. Please ignore the chat. Please
Okay.
ignore the chat.
Okay. So, okay. So,
Madam, you are audible. One request, you can down the dialog box in your windows. That is hiding your PPT. The two dialog box that is been in your screen.
dialog box, you mean this one?
Yeah, you can by the mouse you can catch it and you can pull it down.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And
Is
one in
that
the
fine?
bottom also. One in the bottom also.
Okay. How do I?
You press that with the mouse and please drag it down, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, madam.
Is
Now
it?
it's clear. Thank you very much, madam.
Yeah. Fine. So, as I was telling you earlier, when this case was booked in Bangalore, they booked it under the Wildlife Protection Act because the investigating officers, they thought that this was the Indian cobra, or I mean one of the Indian species of cobras. But then it turned out to be the Chinese spitting cobra, and so the case was then booked to under the CITES. So there is a ban against trade of several endangered species also. So depending on what result comes out from an analysis, the criminals can be booked under that particular wildlife under that particular act. Yeah. So here again, this is open to the audience. If you all can identify which is the real snake skin, tiger skin, and which are the fake ones. I think some of them are very clear which are the fake ones. Sorry, the answer is already written here. So only A. A is a real skin. It is from a real, taken from a tiger, while all other three of them are fake skins. So this is either cattle or dog or goat skin, which has been painted and sold in the market. So we can identify the source of the skin by doing DNA analysis. So I'll quickly go back to the earlier question which I had on ivory. And I think several people have tried to answer this. So A is the real ivory. You see this hollow structure and all these serrations on the top of the, on the ivory. This is the real one, while all others are plastic. And it's also hollow. Yeah. So when it's hollow like this, we can extract DNA from inside the hollow part, which usually has blood vessels or some form or nervous connections. And here several such horns were confiscated at Chennai airport by the customs, and the entire consignment came to CCMB, and it was initially suspected to be from a wild animal, but after DNA analysis, it was found to be from cattle, and it was from Ongole breed in Nellore. Yeah. And other than species identification, we can also do sex identification of the samples which come to us. Why is it important to know the sex of the animal? Because many times, I mean, especially when a female is killed, and if the female happens to be in a reproductively active phase of her life, then it is a big loss for the conservation, for protection and conservation of that species. Because a female leopard or a female tiger in her lifetime can bring up several young animals, and this is a huge blow for conservation when a female is killed. And but unfortunately, it is very easy to target a female because a young mother, along with her cubs, she cannot travel very fast, and it's very easy to locate such animals when they are with their cubs. When a female, when a mother is killed, then we also end up losing the cubs because these cubs do not survive. And so it's not just death of one animal, but several animals when a female is killed. So now I'll come to tiger forensics, as this is my focus area. So far, whatever cases I've shown you all and discussed about species identification is done by my colleague Dr. Ajay Gord, and I specifically focus on tiger and leopard forensic investigations. So although recently, as you all must be knowing, last year 2018 census was a huge success, and India declared that we have doubled the number of tigers which we have, And we have nearly 3,000 tigers in India, and this is the largest population. I mean, no other country in the world has as many tigers as we do. And we have been very successful in protecting our tigers. That's what we claim. But unfortunately, this has been an uphill struggle. Saving and protecting every tiger is a huge task for the forest department because of poaching. Poaching is one of the biggest problems which we have to tackle now, and we have to ensure that we can reduce the number of tiger deaths by poaching. The other problems like management of forests, providing corridors, connectivities, all that can be dealt with if we can handle poaching. So there are various ways in which tigers are killed in the forest, and there is a huge market for almost every body part of tiger. It's very difficult to smuggle out skin, but other than that, teeth, bone, whiskers, nails, everything has a market, both within, to a limited extent in India, but to a very big extent outside India. China, Vietnam, and all these South Asian countries are a big market for tiger body parts. And along with tigers, we are parallelly having another problem that in the name of tiger, several leopards are being killed and their body parts are being sold as tiger to these markets. So, along with tiger, we are also losing several leopards, and this loss is still not accounted for. We are still not paying attention to how many leopards we are losing and what is the population estimation of leopards in India. But definitely the damage is huge, and soon in the next few years we'll seriously start focusing on conservation of leopards also. So I started this work way back in 2008, and it was initiated by another colleague in CCMB, and she had done her PhD on this. Subsequently, I expanded this work to several parts of the country where we collected fecal samples and tried to do the individual identification of tigers based on DNA which we get from fecal samples. It is difficult to even see these animals in the forest. So we rarely get to see tigers in forest in protected areas, and it is relatively easier to collect fecal samples. So the rectal epithelial cells which are present on the surface of the fecal samples, that is the source of DNA for us. We isolate DNA and we try to do individual identification of tigers. So I went to me and my team, we went to several places across India and collected we collected thousands of samples, and we identified nearly 500 tigers in this process. So this is a brief outline of how we do of the entire analysis. So our sample is fecal sample, as I told you. That is an easy source of DNA. It's non-invasive. We don't disturb the animal, and it's easier to get permissions from forest department when we say that we are going to deal with fecal samples. So we collect fecal samples, extract DNA from the surface epithelial cells, and then we first check whether that particular sample is from a tiger or not. It could be from its the other sympatric carnivore present in the forest, like leopards. So in most parts of India, there are of course places in Northeast where it can get confused with clouded leopard also. But other than that, in most parts of India, tiger samples can mainly be confused with leopard samples. So we first do this tiger specific PCR and identify whether the particular sample is from a tiger or not. Once we establish that, then we use a panel of microsatellite markers and identify the individual tiger. This is similar in procedure, the way humans are identified. The same way human DNA fingerprinting is done, we now do tiger DNA fingerprinting. And once we have the genotype of individual tigers, that can be used for various analysis like population genetics, landscape genetics, and also forensic analysis. Now, this is a very tricky type of analysis, and it is tricky in the sense it is not accepted in court. I mean, in India, of course, it's accepted, but in several other places, when animal samples are genotyped and we do individual identification of animal sample, we also need to have lot of background information. We should have databases of that particular species. We should have the allele frequency. We should have several other background information before we are confident that the particular sample which we have identified as coming from a particular individual is correct or not. And we should also calculate our level of accuracy. So I will also try to explain what I mean by species specific PCR. So earlier in the earlier slides, I told that a portion of the mitochondrial DNA is amplified and it is used for identifying all species, right? And that was patented by my institute. So in that case, what happens is the primer sits on a region of DNA which is conserved for all species. So it doesn't matter which species that sample belongs to. The primer will go and sit there, but the region which is sequenced in between. So primer sits in the flanking region, and the region in between which is sequenced, that is different, and that is species different for every species. Once we get the sequence, we know from which species that particular sample belongs to. Okay, that is when that is the meaning of a universal primer. That means the primer will amplify samples from each and every species. It does not discriminate. Based on the sequence which we get, we can then identify the species. But when we develop species-specific PCR, the primer will sit, the primer will attach to that DNA only if it belongs to a particular species. If it belongs to any other species, the primer will not sit and the PCR will not work. So that is the difference between universal primer and species specific primer. So we have designed tiger specific primers. So once we collect fecal samples from any forest, we first do this PCR. We first establish that that particular sample belongs to tiger, and then we go for individual identification of that sample. So this is these are the various things which I have done earlier before I ventured into forensic analysis of tiger samples. So the first step was species identification. Once we do that, then we do individual identification. We also check whether we have by mistake amplified leopard samples. So we also do a cross species analysis. Then we do sex identification. And once we have the information about individuals, we can go for various other advanced analysis like paternity analysis. We can assess whether that from which particular area that sample came from, etc. So as I was telling you, this is the species specific marker which was used. So here in B, this is the marker which was developed by CCMB. These are leopard samples. You see, leopard samples have not worked at all. The PCR, when we run it in gel, there is no amplification, while tiger samples have amplified. So this is how we differentiate between leopard sample and tiger samples. There are several other publications which also claim to be species specific, like A, C, and D. But you see, there is cross amplification with leopards. So not everything gives a clean result. So we have to validate our markers we have to test it over and over again to ensure that what is tiger specific will work only in tiger and it will not work in any other species. So this test was done several times. It was done with great stringency, and we developed this tiger specific marker. And then we also checked the microsatellite markers which we use in tigers for individual identification. We also screen the same markers in leopards. So these are conserved regions. Although it is part of junk DNA, the same microsatellite markers are present in leopard, it is present in domestic cat, it is present in tiger. So across the felids, all felids will have similar microsatellites, and so it becomes important to screen related species. It is important to screen all the related species and validate that what we are getting, the result which we are getting, is truly tiger and it is not confused, it is not mixed up with any other species. So this I'll briefly run through some of the studies which I have done. So as you all must be knowing, tiger went extinct or rather tiger disappeared from 2 of the tiger reserves in our country so far. I mean, there are several others in line now, but the whole panic situation in India started when tigers disappeared in 2 protected areas in India. One was Sariska in Rajasthan, and the second was Panna in Madhya Pradesh. So tigers from Ranthambore were translocated to Sariska, and similarly to Panna, there are several protected areas in Madhya Pradesh, and tigers were translocated from here to Panna. And this was a beautiful study which was carried out by Wildlife Institute of India, and we were lucky to collaborate with them at that time. So, sorry, the tigers which were translocated were also radio collared, so we could actually see um, how these tigers moved around, how they established territory, how they found their mates, etc. So in this particular study, one male from Pench was translocated to Panna, and 3 females from Kana and Bandhavgarh were translocated to Panna. And the assumption by the forest department and all researchers was that this male mated with the 3 females, and the cubs which were born there are all offspring of that particular male. So you see here, sorry. Yeah, so T3, here T3 is the male, T1, T2, T4 and T5 are the females which were translocated to Panna, and these are their offspring. So we did the same genotyping, we did the microsatellite analysis, and we actually checked whether T3 is the father of all the cubs, which were whether he sired all the cubs or whether there was another tiger in the landscape which sired the cubs. And we found that there was another sire, like these cubs here, they are not sired by T3. There's zero relationship with T3. Others are sharing close to 50% of their alleles with T3, but this particular set of cubs are not related to T3. And then with further study, we could establish that there was one more tiger in the landscape, and the female had mated with that tiger. So also we can use the same information once we have genotypes of tigers from across India. And if supposing a skin is confiscated in an airport, or some body parts are found while they are being transported across the borders, we can actually pinpoint from which part of India this particular tiger was, I mean, where it was killed, and from to which population it belongs. But for that, we should have information of tigers from all the protected areas in in the country. In addition to that, the markers, or rather the microsatellite markers which we use, should be informative enough to give us that level of discrimination. We should be able to identify exactly where this animal was captured, where it was killed. So this helps the forest department in carrying out their investigations, and also if there are repeated poaching cases from a particular area in India, then the protection and management can be tightened in that particular place. As I already explained to you, sex identification is very important. There are uh, various markers which can be used for sex identification, and this is a very, very important part of our forensic investigation, because it's easy to kill a female, but when a female is killed, there's a lot of loss to the conservation of tiger. And so far, over the past uh, uh, 12 years or so, we have got cases from almost all the range states, tiger range states from across India. But maximum cases come to us from Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Karnataka. And other states are now slowly catching up, and they have started sending us samples. But as you can see here, maximum inquiries are from Maharashtra. And these are the type of questions which they ask us: which species, which individual, what is the sex of that animal, from which population does that particular sample belong to, and what is the relationship. So individual identification and relationship becomes important when there are multiple samples in a case. There are cases where we get even 80, 100 samples at a time, and we have to genotype each sample. It may be bones, it may be whiskers, it may be teeth, and we have to genotype each sample separately, identify the individuals, and also check whether these individuals are related to each other. So these are the type of queries which we get with the cases. So I'll just go through 2 or 3 cases which we resolved in the past, and here this particular tiger was found just outside Nagpur. It was a putrefied carcass, and it was found outside Nagpur, very close to the highway, and it was killed by electrocution. But the carcass was found maybe 2 or 3 weeks after its death, and several body parts were already missing. So once the body was discovered, then the forest department and police, they raided some of the neighboring villages, and these parts were found with with 6 or 7 villagers. All these parts were found with them, and the entire thing came to CCMB. A part of the skin, and the pelvic girdle came to us from the putrefied carcass, and all these small pieces came from the various confiscations. And we matched all of this back to the dead body. So all these body parts were taken from the same tiger. We could match this because of genotyping and microsatellite analysis. And this was way back in 2000 when, and this happened in Hyderabad Zoo, where a person broke into the zoo, and a young tigress was killed um, inside the safari area of Hyderabad Zoo. And this became a very sensational case, but unfortunately, this never was resolved properly. But this is the basis of our tiger. I mean, we started investigating tiger cases after this particular case. And so we have to deal with a lot of problems when we are investigating wildlife cases. There are powerful people who are involved in these poaching circles, and there is politics, there's power, there's corruption. And so in spite of all this, we have to do our investigations despite this. And this case, has never been satisfactorily resolved. Some random person was arrested, but unfortunately, we could not do proper DNA analysis in this case. And here there was a huge poaching ring in Maharashtra, in Melghat and Melghat area. So here, as you can see, the DNA samples, samples which were sent to us was bloodstained soil, decomposed flesh, intestinal parts, and a metal trap which was found with bloodstain and hair samples. This was found about a kilometer away from this bloodstained soil. It was hidden in some bushes, this metal trap, and then just based on this physical evidence, it's very difficult to identify which animal was killed there. But once we did the DNA analysis, we could identify that actually 4 tigers were killed there. And based on our evidence, this poaching ring was busted. This and the following case. This was a major conviction where people get 5-year term. This is a non-bailable this thing crime, and they were also fined 50,000 rupees each. And here, there are of course human rights and human ethics involved, but the investigating officers, in addition to sending us samples of the killed animal, also send nails of the samples. They cut the nails. They clip the nails of the people who were caught there and pack the nails separately. Each person's nails were packed separately and sent to us for analysis. And we could match one person's nail DNA, which we got from the nail of one of the persons, matched exactly with the tiger which was killed at that particular location. So this was a case which was resolved, fast-tracked actually, and resolved in Maharashtra. In addition to all the DNA analysis, we now regularly conduct skill development programs because we realize, as a central government body, it's our responsibility that this particular science spreads to all parts of the country, and we train people regularly in our analysis. And it's a 1-week program in wildlife forensics, which is attended by students and veterinary doctors, forest officers, etc. And uh, and it's a certificate course in wildlife analysis, in forensic analysis. We conduct this twice a year, but of course this time we had to, it's postponed because of the present situation. In addition to that, we have short courses and lectures for police, forest department, IFS officers, IPS officers, college students, and students of forestry. And we also try to uh, uh, explain our work to people who come from abroad, so that people are aware of what's happening here in India. We had this, we also train, and we hope to establish laboratories. We handhold and we train people so that there are laboratories in every state of the country, and we wish that this work expands to every state. So if there are more labs which can deal with such cases, then it would be easier tackling crime in India, and we will be able to manage the poaching situation in a better way. We have come out with a standard operating procedures on how we do this DNA analysis. What are the protocols which are followed? What type of markers? What type of DNA? How to extract DNA, etc., in a very elaborate SOP. And this is available on our website. Anybody can follow this, and I mean, if they have any problems, they can get back to us. We are more than willing, more than happy to help people uh, in establishing these techniques. So in future, of course, the work is not over. It is still in its infancy. We would love to, I mean, the idea is to develop databases, individual databases for species which are vulnerable to poaching in India, like tiger, leopard, elephant, rhino. We need these databases so that we can tackle the problem more effectively. We also need databases of samples which of species which are hunted in large numbers, like pangolins, star tortoise, snakes, various reptiles which are hunted in large numbers and transported across the borders, which are found in airports, in various airports across the world, and then they're brought back to India. We need to understand from which place they were caught. We need to understand so that we can either repatriate the animals or, if possible, control poaching, control crime in that particular area. And soon we hope to expand to to the marine systems also, because this is one area which is lagging behind. There's a lot of crime which is happening along the coastline of India, but unfortunately we do not have proper investigation mechanisms there. So we hope to expand there also. Thank you. Thank you for listening patiently. I hope I was